New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
New Thought Media Network is proud to present New Thought's Roots and Branches with Reverend Dr. Ruth Miller. Join us every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Mountain Time. Tune in live or watch anytime on our YouTube channel. Discover the rich history of New Thought and its impact on modern spirituality. Join Reverend Dr. Ruth Miller as she shares insights, stories, and teachings that inspire and uplift. Experience deep insights and transformative teachings that connect you to the roots of New Thought. Visit our YouTube channel to catch up on past episodes and join us live every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Connect with us and be part of the journey.
Well, hello there. I am Ruth Miller, and this is New Thought's Roots and Branches on the New Thought Media Network, and it is a delight to be able to be here with you. Today, we're going to be talking about Malinda Cramer. Now, if you studied in the Unity tradition or the religious science tradition, this may be a very unusual name. You may not have even heard it, but for the divine science branch of New Thought, Malinda Cramer is very important. She is the beginning. So let's look at this map that we have of New Thought in its roots. As you see, we come from an ancient tradition all the way back through the Greeks and the Romans, through the Christian tradition, all the way into the European Enlightenment, and then we get into these modern teachers. Yes. And in our next slide, we get to see some of these more modern teachers, which is to say, starting in the 1850s, well into the end of the 20th century. And Malinda Cramer is right there near the middle of the slide with the two pictures, one of which is Malinda Cramer. So let's look at our lady, Ms. Cramer, the next slide. Her husband was a photographer. So we have one photograph very near the beginning and another photograph very near the end of her 17-year career as a New Thought teacher and healer. Malinda Cramer was not born Cramer. She was born Malinda Elliott. But if we look at the next slide, we can see that in those 17 years, starting in 1888, this amazing thing called Divine Science International became a reality. And you can see there's some very interesting subtleties to the design of their shield. But divine science everywhere is the essence of what they are about. In the next slide, we get to see our wonderful beginnings of Malinda Elliott. She was born on the East Coast in the New York area in a large Quaker family. Actually, it was more like Pennsylvania than New York, but it was in that area that is the mid-Atlantic states. And that Quaker family, 11 kids, I can't even imagine. And at 15, she was one of the younger ones, and she developed a disease. And the doctors were saying no way it could ever be cured. And she was pretty much an invalid. And they took her to all different kinds of doctors. And finally, they took her to a doctor in New York City who said, well, the best we could hope for is if you move out of this highly polluted East Coast and move to the West Coast, to San Francisco, where the air is wonderful all year round, and you'll get those fresh ocean breezes. So when she was 18, Malinda's family moved to San Francisco, hoping that it would cure Malinda. Unfortunately, it didn't. However, very soon after they arrived, Malinda was courted by and married Charles Lake Cramer, a photographer in San Francisco who had his own studio. And they had 3 sons in spite of her illness and in spite of the treatments that doctors kept giving her. So that brings us up to the point of her trying to find a way out. So in 1881, Malinda Cramer began to look around. She heard about Christian Science. And if you remember when we talked about Mary Baker Eddy, it was 1881 to the 1903, really, that Mary Baker Eddy was expanding the Christian Science movement and inviting people all over the world to take her classes. And then it happened that Emma Curtis Hopkins delivered lectures in the San Francisco area during that time between when she was laid off at Mary Baker Eddy's Christian Science College and the time that she went to Chicago and became the editor of the Chicago magazine Mind Cure for Mr. Schwartz. And then Emma went again at request and invitation in 1887. So we know that Malinda Cramer was exposed to the teachings that we call New Thought, but we also know that she was dreadfully unhappy and in pain. So one morning in 1885, she went into her prayer time. And we think she went into that having thoughts that maybe there was a possibility based on what she had heard from Christian Science people and from Emma Hopkins. So she asked, is there a way out of my condition? Is there a power in the universe that can heal me? How many of us have asked that question, eh? Whatever the situation is, whether it's a physical issue, emotional, financial, relationship, most of us have come to that place of going, is there any way out of this? Is there any power that can help me? Well, she actually, after she sat with that question for several hours, experienced a realization of omnipresence. And it freed her from the belief that her condition controlled her. Okay? So just like Myrtle had to be freed from the belief that the condition was inherited and she was subject to it, Malinda Cramer needs to do the same. So she has an experience. In the next slide, she tells us the answer to her question after several hours was an all-absorbing realization of a presence and power not before realized. She said, this presence was more than personal. It was omnipresence. It was more than any visible object before me. It was real and permanent. It was so vivifying and illuminating that I knew I was one with it. I realized it to be my life, the very being, knowledge, health, and power that I am, she said. And then it was as a consuming fire, in that all things became it and were this one presence manifested. I think that's the most detailed version I've heard of that experience of becoming aware that it's all one. We are part of it. We are not separated from it. It is all one. And everything around us is that one. And all that we've ever known, well, isn't. So now we can live life in a whole new way. So what happened was, in her next slide, we see she began to let go of the old habits of belief in this knowing, this realization, this making real of the possibility and the actuality of one power, one presence. And she became healed. And soon understood that the reason she was healed was to be a teacher and a healer. She began to understand that the power was God in expression, and healing was God in expression. So she began to share her experience with others, as all of us do when we find ourselves suddenly or even gradually quite well compared to what we were at some previous time. People want to know what's up. So we start sharing the experience, and they have more questions. And so we come up with more questions, and then they say, can we do it for you? Or could we do it for them? Or something like that. So they began to develop this capacity. She began to develop both classes about what had happened, and she began to offer healing treatments. In fact, she offered 17 free healing treatments in that first year and was just overwhelmed by the results. Some of them took more than one session. Some of them took just one session, and immediately they were healed. As we go on, we can see in the next slide that there was such a response to all of this work she was doing that she decided to found the school that she called Divine Science Home School. It was May 4th of 1888. And then later that year, she began to realize she could publish a magazine, very much as Christian Science, Mary Baker Eddy had, as Emma Hopkins had, and so on, to publish a magazine to share her experience and share other people's experiences working with her materials. So there were enough people reading the magazine and learning from her that she founded an association. The International Divine Science Association was founded in May of 1892, just 4 years after she began to start teaching this in her home school. During the years following that, she went around the world many times, and among other things, she met with Fanny Brooks Small and Nona Brooks, who were the founders of the Divine Science College and Church, having studied with her in 1899. She continued to travel all over the country and to the UK and Australia. And people were just amazed, the energy of this woman who was doing all of this work and was able to do all of this in her 50s, traveling by herself in the 1880s and 90s. Amazing, really. It just excited people to no end to be able to see this woman doing this work. So what was it that she was teaching? If we look at the dedication on the next slide to the school that she founded, she says there is no truth that is not included in spirit. Science is co-eternal with spirit, its action and result. So science to her was in the fundamental meaning of the word, which means a way of knowing. Scientia in the Latin is knowing, could be knowledge, but it's the active verb of knowing. So science is co-eternal with spirit. Knowing, learning, becoming the knowledge is co-eternal. It goes on always, right? And then the second line, and then to truth, to the good, we dedicate the home college. And she ended up calling it college more often than not. Then she says, to universal spirit, in which we live and move and have our being, and which is our eternal home, we dedicate this college. Now that phrase, live and move and have our being, comes out of the Christian scriptures and is something that was one of the fundamental affirmations in Emma Curtis Hopkins' teachings. So it's a familiar concept in the New Thought movement and something that we kind of forget in spirit, in life, in well-being, in the beauty and joy of beingness that we call God or universal spirit. We live and move and have our being. Yes. And then the last one, to the source of all truth, the bestower of all blessings, the life of all things, we dedicate our college. So this is not every word, but almost the whole dedication when she founded that home school and began to see herself primarily as a teacher and a healer. If we go on to the next slide, we see that it was quite effective By 1913, she had divine science churches and schools in Denver and Seattle and Los Angeles and Oakland and Boston and Portland, Oregon, Spokane, St. Louis, and New York. Now, I spent a lot of time in Portland, Oregon, and I found the Divine Science Church there. For those of you who know Portland, it's at the corner of 24th and Broadway, Northeast, and became a metropolitan church approximately 30 years ago. Then, over the next 7 years, more had opened in Los Angeles and San Diego, Sacramento, Topeka, Washington, D.C., Cleveland, Illinois, and Iowa. All of her students and her students' went on to create this process, really. It wasn't a static dogma. It was an ongoing process of knowing, of discovering, of science, of exploring possibilities and getting deeper and deeper into the knowing of the becoming. Now, there were a lot of activities over the last 100 years, unfortunately, and we are down to a very few divine science centers in the world. The top, I can't remember exactly, what are we, 9 or 10, are all in this country. The bottom ones, at the bottom, the Divine Science is in UK, the Divine Science Center, the First Divine Science Church of Australia, and then the Association of Creative New Thought, which is Divine Science in South Africa. So it's still an international federation with a very few centers, all of them dedicated to the proposition that we can know more and more fully who and what we are and what the nature of the all that is must be. Now, this process was not very easy for this woman. If we go into the next slide, we find out that she thought of herself as very timid indeed. I am sure that nothing but self-evident truth would have enabled me to come up over the shrinking habit of fear and to move with no uncertain tread in all undertakings, right? And then she said that she had to actually very carefully analyze and set her statements. There were students who were asking her to do what I kind of do, talk off the top of her head, wing it, if you will. But she was absolutely certain that if she could guarantee that the word that she was saying fit the doctrine of truth as she understood it at that time, then she didn't have to be present to it. And if you remember when we talked about Emily Cady, we talked about the difference between the personality and the individuality. And what Malinda Cramer was aiming for was for that individuality, that knowing of the truth, to be what was expressed, no matter where her personality was in the moment, whether she was tired from a train ride, whether she was exalted because there was a great crowd, it didn't matter. The same truth would come through. So she said in that second point, I desire to analyze every sentence that I may know to a certainty that it embodies the very nature of truth. This method, she says, has proven eminently satisfactory in that the teaching of divine science will stand the test of the true analysis of principle and will enable those who study to apply it in every practical way and to every question pertaining to the real good of humanity. So the true analysis of principle, that is, if there are some fundamental principles that we hold to be true, they must apply to every word that she said. So the principle of omnipresence, that the divine universal spirit is present in all things, everywhere, at all times. The principle of omnipotence, that the principle that the beingness, the omnipresent beingness, is not just all powerful, but is all power. All the power that exists in the world, in the universe, in the all that is this presence, right? And holds true to the principle of omniscience, right? That is all knowing, or all knowledge, or all knowing becoming, right? That science word again in the middle of that. So the omnis are the principle, and that she has to be able to apply them over and over again, knowing that in every situation, only that spirit, as truth, as wisdom, as beauty, as joy, as harmony, is present. So as she began to work with that and try to make these very, very careful statements happen, sometimes she'd come up with a block. And if we look at the next slide, we begin to see that she was often having some difficulties. One day, while writing my first lessons, I was somewhat at a loss to find language with which to express my ideas in the most desirable way, which to me was to express them as if the Spirit or God were speaking. She said, I walked the floor for a time affirming, and this is very important, filling our mind. This is another Emma Curtis Hopkins thing. We fill our mind with truth so that what is going to happen, come forth through us, is an expression of that, right? So she was affirming, I am language. All language is potential in the spirit which I am. I can and do express myself clearly. Then she says, I walked to the window and looked to the right, my eyes resting upon the beautiful hills called Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks, that's a part of San Francisco. Some of you may remember there was actually a TV show about life on the Twin Peaks of San Francisco. And at the time she was living there, they weren't covered with houses. They were covered with a form of tree that's called shore pine that grows along the Northern California coast. So she was looking at beautiful green trees on the Twin Peaks of San Francisco. So I'm going to go back again. I walked to the window and looked to the right, my eyes resting upon the beautiful hills called Twin Peaks, and instantly I saw, quote, the law of expression. Looking at these beautiful hills, she saw a way that spirit is manifest. Always in harmony, always in order, always in beauty. And that was the law of expression. So in the fourth point, I turned from the window and said to myself, I see in this law, or Trinity, creator, creative action, and creation, the unity and fulfillment of all law. A method by which humanity can free itself from the false, what she called race belief, we would say cultural belief, of separation from God, the false belief of separation from God, and from all errors or beliefs resulting therefrom. And again, Emma Curtis Hopkins was very clear. All our suffering comes from our belief that we are separated from what we call our good, which is God. Our belief that we are separated from God leads to all suffering and error. So she's looking, she's trying to figure out what she's going to say. She realizes she needs to get into that place of knowing she is one with the divine, one with the creative spirit. She opens her eyes, she sees the beauty of nature, and she gets it. The law of expression is always in motion and always happening, and humanity can be part of it. And she sees a trinity in action: creator, creative action, and creation, which will be an interesting thing to talk about when we talk about Thomas Troward in a few weeks. All right. So there are two basic teachings in Malinda Cramer's work. If we go on to the next slide, one is what she calls being. Being, a law unto itself. The orderly and unchanging method by which being expresses itself is its own law of expression. So being is law of expression, is being. You cannot separate it. And it is the summum esse, if you will, that which isness. It is isness, right? And she says, it is the knowledge of being alone that enables one to demonstrate one's true nature, what Katie called our individuality, rather than the personality. So if you think about Malinda Cramer being very, very sick, well into her 40s, right? Waking up, discovering the oneness of all that is, and realizing that in that is her true nature, not in all the things that she grew up thinking. Now, keep in mind, she was Quaker, so she was aware of the universality of spirit, but it was out there. Universality had to do with stars and universes, not in here. So that experience of having it happen in here was the huge wake-up call that allowed her to experience her true nature, which is a very energetic, very knowledgeable, very capable woman who is ready to go out and teach and heal now. So it's the knowledge of being alone that enables one to demonstrate one's true nature. So being is the core. And then the next slide is the second point, expression. Right? This law of creation, remember, creator, creative process, and creation is the science of expression. It's the same thing. And she says, as taught and strictly adhered to in divine science and healing, is as essential to a perfect understanding of the detail of science as is the statement of being, essential to its perfect solution and demonstration. Okay? So we have this science of expression in which we are affirming truth as who and what we are, is as essential in the practice of divine science, in the accomplishment of the possibilities of healing that divine science offers, as that realization of the beingness, being who we are. And her second point, this law of expression distinguishes divine science. It is the very bottom of unity. Now here she's talking about as principle of unity. It's all one. You cannot separate it. It's got nothing to do with the unity movement, okay? In fact, at this point, when this is being said, Charles Fillmore has not yet had that inspiration to call it unity. So the law of expression is the very bottom of unification, of wholeness, if you will. It proves that we are the all good in being. Law of expression. So the infinite all that is expressing as creation says that the beingness is in and through all creation, which includes each of us. I like to say I'm the cell at the tip of the finger of the beingness, right? All right. So we are the all good in our being at one with God. And in the Christian world, that is heresy. Okay? Even though it's said over and over again in various places in the New Testament, it's not in the doctrine. So then she says, we proceed forth in perfect action at one with him, at one with the divine beingness that we call God, and in perfect result, at one with the Creator's result, which is creation. So we are at one with the totality of creation as the divine has created it, not as human beings have misunderstood it or believed about it, right? Because expression of beingness is all that is. And as we express truth and express the language of creation, we are being part of, at one with, the all that is. And those of you who studied the Course in Miracles may remember that what we have been taught to pronounce as atonement, the Course invites us to pronounce as at one-ment, that we are at one with each other and all that is. Yes, Yes. So let's look at some of the things she wrote in the next slide. Her initial experience was to put together the lessons, and that is 1890. Remember, she was putting the school together and all of that, and beginning the magazine in 1888 and 1890, and then the 1889, and then in 1890 and 91, the school gets founded. So her lessons in the science of infinite spirit and the Christ method of healing. The C.W. Gordon is the editor of this book as it is currently available. Okay? So the Christ method of healing. Remember way back, if you watch the Quimby show, when he was watching what was happening to the people around him, he believed he had found the science that Christ used to heal. And then Mary Baker Eddy used that language as well. And here we're getting Malinda Cramer's version of that. So the science of the infinite spirit, the knowing, the knowledge, the practice, the method, all of that is woven into the word science of infinite spirit. And then the Christ method. So the Christ method is entering into that state of consciousness that she has just called the statement of being, the beingness in expression, being our true nature rather than being the person that we were trained to be. So her lessons that she was carefully writing that day that she was seeing the Twin Peaks as the law of expression. Then as she traveled around, she began to be able to help people have a way to do the treatments. So her basic statements and health treatment of truth came out in a couple of years as she began to work with more and more people. And again, the expansion of that a couple of years later, right at the end of her time on the planet, basic statements of health treatment of truth, a system of instruction in divine science and its application in healing and for class training, home and private use. And this was officially published by the Home College of Divine Science, which obviously had changed its name from that initial opening of the home school. The last book that you see is the one you're most likely to find, and it is in fact the one you can drop a PDF of if you want, download off of the Divine Science, the International Federation of Divine Science website, okay? And it's, in fact, edited by her husband, C.L. Cramer. And the reason it's edited by her husband is because it came out the year after she had passed on. But let's look in the next slide at what she began to realize and was able to say in interviews as she was traveling around the world. The truth that I have taught and published for the past 17 years has been derived from no book, but from the omnipresent source of all truth, which is an open book and accessible to all who choose to read it. Now, Emily Cady reminded us of that as well, didn't she? In the second point, Malinda tells us, its study will give ease instead of dis-ease, love void of fear, charity in place of criticism, faith that knows no doubt, truth in which is no error, knowledge instead of opinion, happiness that does not yield to sorrow, and harmony that cannot be made discordant. So if you were to pick up that PDF off the International Divine Science Federation, that is the book Divine Science and Healing, you would read these words and you would get the summary of all of her lessons that she would invite you to work through and practice. That's what she was aiming for. Now, Malinda Cramer was really an amazing being. Her way of seeing the world, her determination, to make it possible for everyone out there to have this powerful experience of truth, on and on and on, was something that people just, they were amazed by. She was constantly radiating this truth, this beingness, this possibility. And that's why churches would open up wherever she was, because people go, I see it, I get it, it's real, and I can have it, and we can all share it. And isn't that beautiful? Right? An amazing experience for everyone involved. In order for her to do that, she had to do what we've been asked to do by every teacher before, and that is to fill our minds with these ideas, to repeat them over and over again, and to understand that what we are doing is, in fact, the presence, magnifying or being the presence of the all that is, everywhere presence, everywhere in all that is, right? We are being that. Now, she talks about, in that book, Divine Healing, one of her lessons, lesson 11, is the spoken word, the purpose of God. Isn't that interesting? The spoken word she sees as the purpose of God. She says, in the divine order of creation, or the law of expression, spirit is first in order, living soul second in order, and body the third. So whether one reasons from the plane of what is self-existing, spirit, or from the order of this one in its self-expression, the conclusion is there is but one all. And as all things are produced by the power God puts into his creative action, the result in creation is an exact image of the idea of the Creator, and never is it otherwise. The idea is with God and is God. It is therefore perfectly just and pleasing to God for us to see the outer as the inner and deal with the two as one. This is the divine, eternal, unchangeable order. So she's helping us remember, as the Course in Miracles encourages us to remember, that what we are experiencing is not a function of what is happening to us. What is happening to us is a function of who we are being. So it's who we know ourselves to be, how we express that in our being and into the world, that determines what our experience must be here, now, and always. Yes. So in the next slide, we find that Malinda and her family were living in San Francisco in 1906 in the San Francisco earthquake. And the place where they were living, where she could see the Twin Peaks from her window on the right, was very much in the heart of that earthquake. Now, most people have no idea that most of San Francisco is sand. All of the Golden Gate Park was sand dunes prior to 1930. And most of what is downtown is built on the rubble of the earthquake, actually, and other rubble that's been dumped into the bay to extend the city. So it is really a very unstable kind of environment. And over the last 50 years, they've been sending down deep, deep, deep pylons, trying to get down to the rock that is very deep under the city of San Francisco. So the earthquake was huge, and since most of the buildings at that time were wood, and most people had gas or wood as their primary source of light and fuel, the whole place, the huge part of the city, burned up. And their home was in it, and the home college was in it as well. So that divine home school and all of its contents were destroyed. Can you imagine this amazing being who's been living in the self-expression of the beingness, and her husband and her boys, who are now nearly adults, are all just standing there being overwhelmed by this. And as a result, many, many, many of the letters and the articles, the archived magazines, the classes that she had written up were lost. People have been able to find bits and pieces of it. And if you get in touch with Chris Bazemore out of Largo, Maryland, where the Divine Science School is happening, or with Reverend Will Mercer, who is now, I think, down in Atlanta, both of them have done a lot of work collecting work that Cramer had put together over the years. And there are some books out there. And again, most of them are listed on that International Divine Science Federation website. So it all went away. And it really was only a few months when Malinda said, I guess I'm done. Kind of reminds me of when Emma realized that the heart failure she was experiencing was, quote, God putting an end to a career, right? It was like, okay, if that's what is, that's what is. And so very few months later, she passed over the veil in August of 1906. Powerful woman. Most of what she taught as her own inspiration. Probably some of it was absorbed through listening to other people. Much of it made a huge difference in many thousand people's lives all over the world. And I think partly because the original things were disappeared in 1906, it wasn't possible to sustain it in all those separate churches. Without that driver, the Divine Science Federation effectively broke up. Now, I got in contact with them and we'll talk more about the person I was studying, but I got in contact with them along about 1996. Yes, 1996. And I wrote a few articles for their journal, which is called Harmony. And I found that building in Portland, Oregon, because that's where I was staying at that time. And I realized that there is a deep sweetness in the divine science movement that isn't present in any of the others. And maybe it's because there hasn't been any institutional push to keep things going. And if you connect with any of the divine science communities as you're wandering around in your new thought explorations, you may find the same. That realization that the omnipresence is this just wonderful, sweet experience and expression that doesn't have to be something that we're driving or striving or meeting specific demands or goals, but we get to blend into, relax into, experience the full expression of, in large part through our language, as she pointed out. And as we do so, then we become, as she did, a healing presence. We begin to be able to be with people who are struggling, people who are coming to terms with issues in their bodies and their lives in a way that the truth that we know is expressing itself so powerfully through us that they grasp it. And they experience the expression of the divine that is who and what they are, far more than they would ever lay it on anyone else or think we are it, right? So think about Malinda Cramer, Mrs. Cramer, the photographer's wife, as she comes into her own healing in her 40s and begins to share it and share it and share it for over a decade, almost 20 years, establishing churches, moving around the country, moving around the world on train, no planes, stagecoaches, buckboards, horseback, ponyback, boat, steamships, sailboats, just a couple steamships right at the end, mostly sailboats, everywhere she went, feeling that presence. That's what she would invite us to do today. And there we have the life and times of Ms. Malinda Cramer, divine science, founder and establisher. She did become ordained and is known as the Reverend Cramer. Thank you all so much for joining me today on exploring this branch of the New Thought movement here on Roots and Branches. Have a lovely week. Bye.